Okay guys, we're starting to put this thing back together now, and so I've got some of these bearings back in here. Let's take this one back out. The oddball bearing goes in the middle of your block. Okay, you need to line up the notch, see that notch on there, with the groove there. Alright, just press it in there by hand, it don't take much. Just make sure you're nice and flush on both sides. Okay. Now, and see, I've already got lube on these bearings. You make sure you get these lubed up good. And this time I'm using the CRC engine assembly lube. It's got graphite in it. It's black. It's nice and pasty, which is what I like when I rebuild engines. Something that's going to cling and stick. Don't take a whole lot. Just enough to put a good coat on there. And use your finger and smear it in there. Just make sure you get it covered good and get a good coat on there. Generally I use it's Federal Mogul brand. This right here. I like this stuff. It's nice and sticky, green. That's good stuff. That's usually what I get, but I couldn't get none this time. So we're giving this a try. I haven't used this stuff before, but so far it's working pretty good. I like stuff that's nice and pasty. You can see where it is. You know you got it on there. I used to use this stuff, but this stuff is so thin, it doesn't stick. It works, just I want something that I know is going to stay where I put it. But this stuff I use on the cam, stuff like that, the lifters, I coat in this stuff. But when I do the bearings, I use something nice and thick and pasty. That's my preference. And like I said, I usually use that Federal Mogul stuff, and I've never had a problem with it. But so far, this CRC stuff works pretty good. But we'll go on when I get the crank in there, we'll do some more. Okay guys, one other thing we got here. I went ahead and put the crank in there. I had it polished. Can't really tell it now, but what I did is I coated everything with oil again when I got it back. Another thing I done was I pasted the bearings on the bottom with the lubricant. Once I set the crank in there, I went ahead and I put more on top of the crank. And that's just to make sure it's nice and coated. There's no dry spots. Okay, and another thing you need to do on these engines, on your back bearing, bearing cap, they have crucifix bearings, or crucifix seals that you need to replace. Generally come in your conversion set. Yeah, they're literally called crucifix seals. It's because they're cross. You got a cross. But you need to change those out. Just take a screwdriver and pry out pull out the other old gasket and put those new ones in there. It's kind of like a rear main seal. You don't want bad ones in there because you will leak oil. But you get that, then go ahead and set your bearings, the other half of your bearings in the caps. Go ahead and coat those up like we did before, and then we'll start setting them in there. Just be careful when you put them in here. Where this is a nice tight fit, you don't want to go smacking that in there because you'll dislodge that bearing. So be careful when you put that in there. And then once you get them started, get them in there, start your side bolts first. Make sure they go in the holes and they're lined up. Go ahead and start threading them, and then start threading your top bolts. That way you don't have a problem getting these ones lined up. Just take your time on this part because you do not want to dislodge these bearings and scratch them. Okay guys, when get this put in there and you get all your bearings coated, if you have to, once you get them started in there, you can put these bolts in there, tighten it up to pull it down. Like I said, you don't want to smack it because you'll dislodge that bearing. Also, another thing on this back one, put oil or some kind of lube on these crucifix seals. so they don't tear up when you slide them in there. Same thing with your rear main seal. Make sure you coat that with something, oil or lube, to make sure it doesn't tear up when you fire it up. But if you need to, just put these ones in there to pull it down, and then make sure you can line up your other side bolts before you go tighten anything down. And try not to turn the crank until you get everything tightened up, because you can spin the bearings by doing that. So try not to turn it until until you get everything tightened down where it needs to be. Just because you don't want the headache that can tear this back apart and redo that. Okay, we're doing piston rings here. Pretty easy. A lot of people think it's probably the hardest part of the engine. It's really not. It's self-explanatory. It's easy. I already done one piston here, and there's the old rings. Real easy. And what we're going to do here, you need to take the rings off the pistons. You don't want to scratch the piston, but if you do it, it's okay. Just try not to do it to where it's real deep, and that piston ring just broke, so that's obviously a bad ring. That's what happens when you run them dry at oil. Fry them. Snap that ring. Just work your way around. Just find the groove on the piston ring. It's got the opening. That's where you want to start taking it apart. With that ring, get the groove. Pull it out and just work your way around. Pull it off. Now these ones, the oiling rings, get a little bit tricky. I don't know if I'll be able to do it and hold the camera at the same time, but see, there's one gap right there for the spacer ring. You can get up underneath there, down in here, and pull them out that way. It's one way to do it, pretty easy. Not so easy to do with one hand, though. So you don't want to damage the piston, but if I was smart, I'd go get my pick and pull this out. But, it's not easy one-handed. Let's see here. I'm going to have to set this down for a minute. Okay, once you get one of those expander rings started, just work your way around. Same thing. All the way around the piston. Till it comes out. There's one. There's the other gap. Once you get that first one out, they come out pretty easy. All the way around, it's out. Now the oiling ring. Pretty flimsy, so it'll come out easy. That's it. Now that you got those out, most piston ring sets will come in order, and they'll show you which order, like 1, 2, 3. And 3 is always your oiling set, and you got 3 rings per oiling, and then you get your compression. So we're gonna do the oiling ring first. Take one. Now, putting these on there, you do not want to bend these. So be very careful when you put these on. So when you start with this one, you got notches right above your wrist pin. This is the wrist pin right here. That notch right there, that's where you want that gap. You want this gap in that ring right over top of that. Just put it in there and walk it around. Okay, so once that one's in there, sure the gap is over that middle notch. And you gotta be perfect, but the closer you can get to it, the better off you'll be. Now you got the spacer rings go on that. I start off on the bottom one, and these things are really thin and bend really easy, so be extremely careful when you're doing this. It's hard doing this with one hand. Okay, now you got these other two notches on the outside, about an inch apart. The gaps on these are supposed to be 1 to 2 inches to the left or right of that gap. So if you go right over that, put your gap right there on that notch, it'll be about an inch off. Do the bottom one first because it gets tighter the farther you go. I had my helper with me today. I could have him hold the camera, but there we go. Okay, now we gotta walk that ring back over to there. Now, do the same thing with the top ring, but that gap for the ring that goes, the top spacer ring, we want over here on this notch, 1 inch apart. 2 inches apart on your gaps on the spacer rings, but you're 1 inch off the gap of the oiling ring. Just put those ones on there. You always do your oiling rings first. You don't want to sit there and fight trying to get them over the compression rings because you'll bend them and break them, and it's not something you want to mess with. So, that same thing, get started. Walk it all the way around. Make sure gap's right above that notch. That's what we want. Now your middle ring, which is your first compression ring, goes in this next groove. Always has a bevel on it. So if you get lost, if you get mixed up, just check, make sure that the ring that you got in your hand has a bevel on it. I don't know if you can see that. Also, it's going to be marked. It says top. Make sure the top goes on top. And those go on the piston skirts. There. Now these ones are a little bit tighter to get on there. They don't bend too easy. But you still need to be careful because you don't want to break them. Okay, that one's in there. Want that gap right over the piston skirt. Right there, piston skirt's right here. That's where you want that gap. And your last ring, same thing. Now this one doesn't have a groove on it, but this one, you want the gap on the other piston skirt. Like I said, this one's not grooved, but it's a chrome ring. And this one doesn't matter if you go top or bottom. These aren't marked. So just, again, carefully. This one will go on a little bit easier because you're on top. But just be careful putting them on there. And put that ring right there on that skirt. Do that 8 times and you're good to go. Just be careful and don't bend them.